Welcome to Canvas of the Heart, presented by Free Arts for Abused Children of Arizona. The mission of Free Arts is to transform children's trauma to resilience through the arts. This show is a collection of conversations that spotlight the ways Free Arts creates hope for children and teens who've experienced abuse, neglect, or homelessness. We hope you find this show to be informative, inspiring, and fun. All right, welcome back to Canvas of the Heart. I am back with two familiar guests, right? Jenna and TJ, both part of the team here at Free Arts. And we have in mind today an important set of questions that come from a lot of you, those that listen to this podcast, those that volunteer here, and then those of you that were just meeting for the first time as you're becoming trained in what we do at Free Arts. And so these are frequently asked questions about our work, your approach to it, and your role. And so it makes sense to get a couple voices in on here. We all have something to add to some of these. Some of these are logistical and some of these are philosophical. And one of them is actually controversial for some people in society. So we're going to tackle that one too. Number one, is what kind of commitment is involved in being a Free Arts mentor? So I want to take that one first for just a second. I definitely want to hear what you think, TJ. But what I tell people a lot about Free Arts in mentoring is because of the way we do our programming, it can be very accessible because it can be scaled. So if you're a person that has a lot of time and wants to give weekly time for years, there is a role for you. If there's somebody who comes to town only in the winter, there's a role for you. If you have fall and 5 weeks, there's a role for you. So because of that, you're looking at a commitment of 1 to 2 hours a week once you sign on to a program that typically has a beginning and an end. And we have seasons of different types of programming. So you can go all the way up. We do have weekly volunteers who will come in and do things in our building, in our art room. That can be a significant amount of time if that's the time you have. And then there are others who can only be here in the spring. And so that's often something I say about the commitment and the time around it. What do you think? What would you add to that, TJ?
Generally, I think of it as like we have a smorgasbord of opportunities. So I would just expound. I think that what you said was perfect in many ways. I would just add too that even if you have one day here and there, like you're working and you only have weekends, you can do one of our Free Arts days at Cultural Partners or here. So it can be, we have several volunteers who volunteer 2 and 3 times a year because they're only here and they like to do it at this this cultural partner, and so that's their jam, and then it can be the longer planning, doing mentor sessions at a partner agency, So it really does, it can take a wide variety of shapes.
Yes. And then I have met as many people that used to volunteer at Free Arts as I have actual mentors at Free Arts. What do I mean by that? They were a student. They were in social work school. It fit their time schedule for a certain period. They're still a fan. They might read our newsletter, listen to this podcast, but they can't volunteer at this point in their life. That's okay. We're proud of you too.
Yeah. And we actually have 2 Creighton medical students that are going through the process right now because they want to just go do Free Arts days to give themselves a break from the pressure of med school. So it's that balancing the left and right brain kind of thing.
Yeah.
We're too into the left brain activity, so we want to go do some art.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's honest when I talk about the scheduling is because I've found it daunting to hear the pitches from other agencies where you often hear like the literal poster is a 20-year commitment.
Right.
And it's like, whoa. Yeah. And I don't think any of them got involved at that level thinking it would take that long or last that long. And they're obviously very happy for it. But this is more scalable.
And I think it also appeals to, like you said, scalable. If you have the time, if you have the inclination to do a long project, like you said, that's great. But The new volunteer, I keep hearing in volunteer engagement, they want not the long commitment. They want the pop in, pop out. Use my skills, I'm done with my skills. And so we've got that too. So we have volunteers from Boomer to Gen Z. So, and everything in between, because we have such a scalable volunteer program.
Awesome. Yeah. So I think that helps frame that a little bit around commitment. Our second question is one that promotes or prompts a lot of dialogue. And the question is, so let me give the context first. So we have orientation, which can be online or in person. We have training that is almost always in person. And these are places where people are often coming to our facility for the first time. And so that's the whole like sign your name in, get a name tag. And next to the name tags are either stickers, or a staff member might say, and feel free to share your pronouns and as you feel fit or feel led. And so some take that and write their name and their pronouns. Some just write their name. And some ask questions about like, what is this for? What does this mean? And for me to kind of address this question, I go back to even my experience doing intakes as a counselor. Like you're meeting somebody for the first time in a setting and you're filling out what's beginning a medical chart. And even in medical practice, we had questions around gender and use of pronouns, how someone would like us to refer to them as. And in my experience doing intakes, when you start in a lot of clinics, you do intakes for a while, about 1/3 would be, I have an answer. 1/3 is, what is that? And 1/3 had an opinion. So I want us to think about that in the way that this might be heard. 1/3 have an answer, 1/3 have a question, and 1/3 have an opinion. And so we want to address, why do we ask about pronouns? And because at Free Arts, we are trying to set circles and an environment of maximum inclusion for participants, for our volunteers, for our staff, for any stakeholder in our community, that they can be accepted as they are. And what does that mean? This is definitely the thing of science. It can be its own podcast, and there are lots of resources. We will have some on this episode if you are so choosing to think about what is the neurobiology around sex and gender. And so I want to define a couple terms. So we have gender identity and gender expression. And gender identity is the internal sense of what your gender is. Everyone carries some level of it, and it is often a thing that is illustrated by example in society, that people should think and feel a certain way, but it is an internal sense. And because it's an internal sense, people are the natural person to describe that identity for themselves. Expression is the physical manifestation, is how someone shows up in the way they look, how they dress. And this is very culturally bound, right? If you think about even societies that coexist now across our world, there are clothing items that one culture thinks is a gender specific that is opposite in another. And this is a culturized element here. And so what we're recognizing is there's an essential identity that people carry with them. And there's an expression that is basically specific to culture that is something that has meaning as it's displayed. And so what we are trying to do when we ask that is create a situation where we follow a golden rule, that we allow people to self-identify and reflect the language that they use about themselves. So somebody says, and for my case, Matt Sandoval, I use he, him pronouns, right? What I'm saying is this is the way that I describe myself. You're welcome to use those pronouns about me. I also have a certain amount of privilege in that how I generally represent is something people can infer by appearance and make a sense of what would I say about this person. And there are others where their identity and their expression are they have a difference in their identity versus their experience around expression. And this can be something somebody becomes more clear about over time as they age. And the data is very clear. If you're meeting an older teen, a young adult who says, I believe my identity is thus, this is not a phase. This is who they are, and we should take their word at that. So that means when we ask everyone, we're allowing us all to participate in this sense of identity and expression without making certain people feel like they have to tell something that other people don't have to say. And that can be a hard thing for people to understand at first, which is, well, why would you ask me? Of course it's he, him. No, I'm answering my question because somebody else might have to tell us something that's important about their identity that I wish to respect. And so we consider that a kind thing in that we are honoring somebody's identity about themselves. Where we get the most questions is, do you teach this to children? Do you teach that? And no, we are completely responsive to the way a participant responds to themselves. And I can tell you anecdotally, as a former counselor, I had young children, 8 and 9, tell me two things. One, I have this sense about myself. And two, I cannot tell my parents. What a lonely place for that to be. What a lonely place for that to be. And so what I would say is we don't have a class about gender expression or gender identity. We have a respect for people's expression of it. So if you come and you say, oh, I've signed in, here's my name tag, I don't wish to share anything, we respect that. And if you share something, we respect that. Mm-hmm. And we ask you to respect what the other person has shared. And so that's why we ask. It's about inclusion. It's about recognizing all the dynamics and the diversity that is in the human species, and that comes in because we really want Free Arts to be a space for all. So I'm wondering if any of you would like to chime in on that.
It kind of goes back to a thought that we also do from my early feminist roots, is that naming is important. And TJ is not my birth name, but I went through a whole period, as I think many people do, of thinking about what I want to call myself and thinking then of the connections that my name has. So if one of our participants comes to me and says, hey, our famous story is GT Mustang, is what we talk about. And this kid came running and going, I'm going to be GT Mustang. They will, if it's appropriate, let you call. They will call you what you want to be called. You name yourself. And so the mentor that had that experience says, I don't think I know that person's real birth name. And it doesn't matter because they felt accepted and happy. So it does, that kind of thing is very, calling pronouns, using pronouns that you want and your name that you want, just make somebody essentially feel welcomed and safe. And safety is where we have to start.
It's bottom of the pyramid.
And I think it's interesting because when we look at the reasons why people say that they want to come and they want to volunteer with us, we tend to hear the same things a lot. Is that, they want to give back and they want to enhance other people's lives, and they know how it felt, or they had similar experiences and so on. And so it's actually a moment of self-reflection. It's because if you're trying to instill such positivity in the lives of another person, it starts with being able to recognize the respect that you have for them and how that's different. That might be, having respect for them and their preference might be different than what you perceive for yourself, but then it's not about you. Yes, you have your own beliefs, but if that's why you're here, I think that's another source of reexamination for yourself, is because if you're here for another person, then you're giving up something from you to be able to accommodate them. So I think that's one of the things that when you're looking into coming into this space, look at your motives and how does that show up for you or how do you allow those things to show up for the person that you're here for?
I think that's true for sure. And then I would add also that people are afraid because they don't know about gender identity and gender expression, that they're going to make a mistake oftentimes. And what we always say is the attempt is what matters. if you get it wrong, just apologize and move on. But that attempt is magic for the participants.
Yep. Thank you both for adding to that. That's awesome. All right. Question 3, and this one's for you, Jenna. Tell us where the participants come from.
Oh, this is kind of one of my favorite questions because I when I started here, I did not realize how many people didn't know where our participants came from, but then they also didn't know where they thought they were. They say they didn't know the truth, but then they didn't know what they thought. And so it was one of those situations like, I don't know, but here we are. And our participants come from so many different settings, environments, living situations. We have participants, most of our participants come from foster care group homes. They're in congregate care. And I think one of the shocking things about it is that a lot of our volunteers don't know what the setup looks like. They're like, they might have an image in their mind based off of maybe something they've seen on TV, or just what they conceptualize in their own brain, not recognizing that they look like regular homes. They just look like regular homes. You can pass by them and you would not know that that is a foster care group home. And I think that's one of the important things to remember, is because one of the things about being in foster care is that it is very disruptive. And so that's an attempt at normalization there, is giving you a home-like setting. So that's one reason. And then 2, security purposes. You don't want a big, huge sign up on your door, so, indicating who the occupants are. And so it's also a safety mechanism. But that's one of the biggest places, or one of the where we find the most of our participants in that congregate care and the foster care group homes. But we also have participants who are living in some type of transitional housing because they are unhoused, and they could be individuals or they can be families, hopefully trying to stay together as best they can. So you're having some shelters that are trying to keep families together as much as possible. So we go into different shelters also to work with the individuals, sometimes young adults, or sometimes they are the families. And domestic violence shelters as well. Anywhere where you can find where there has been experiences of trauma. And so lives have been disrupted, and recognizing that lack of stability with where you are means that it's hard for you to come to us, right? So that means we have to go into these facilities, and we're bringing the programming to you. Another place where you can find some of our participants are unaccompanied minor shelters. I don't know how many people really know, unless you come into our space, that we work with unaccompanied refugee minors, excuse me, here in the Phoenix area. When they're coming in with so many different experiences regarding their journey. Like if you've ever heard of the concept of the triple trauma paradigm, you're talking about your pre-migration struggles. Then you're talking about the actual migration journey, and then the trauma that can occur post-migration once you're already here, and the difficulties that come with resettlement. So we go into those shelters, and sometimes they come to us, and we work alongside with the facility staff to bring programming to this very diverse group of children and teens. We also work we go to treatment centers, behavioral health centers, where a lot of the occupants there have experienced multiple types of trauma, different types of addictions as well that they're battling through. And so we're bringing programs there to those facilities, even in schools especially, where a majority of the students there are experiencing extreme poverty, even those in alternative school placements as well. That's a major one, a major school system that we work with. And then we have those who are outside of any type of structured facility. So we also have young adults who, they may be in a residential care, or they may be living on their own. but are connected to some type of social service agency, or just identify as having some experience some trauma at some point in their lives, that they can be benefiting from our programs. And then we have our families. And contrary to popular belief, it's not just foster families that we work with. A large majority might be foster families, but we also work with kinship families. And kinship families are those where there is a relation, even if it's not your direct parent, but there's some type of relationship there. So we often see children raised by grandparents, or auntie and uncle has stepped in and taken children into their homes as well, trying to keep the family together as much as possible. And we have adopted families as well that we also work with. And then we even have biological families too, who've experienced significant forms of trauma. So we are all over in our community. We're in different facilities. We're connecting with different partner agencies where we have participants who come to us that are not being housed in a specific structure that's provided by that partner agency. So wherever you are, we're coming to find you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a pretty long list.
Yeah.
But it gives you a sense of the different types of populations that we work with, and they experience the same kinds of programs. Mm-hmm. The context might look different based on the situation. So that's a great question, one to unpack over time. Want to move to the next one, which is about expectations of a volunteer and the partner agency when we're on site running the program. Like, how does that relationship work? And if one of the classes isn't going according to plan, who solves that? Who figures that out? So I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, TJ.
Initially, partnerships are made between the partner agency and staff here. So we sit down together and talk about our expectations from each other. So one of the big expectations is that our volunteer mentors will not be left alone with children, that there will be people who know the kids better than we do, the participants better than we do. And then they're sort of working in a team together where the volunteer mentors are taking the lead in what's going on, but we invite the partner agency staff to participate in the activity as well. And then we work together to start the day, end the day, and then just manage the flow of in and out, of the room, any issues that come up, bathroom issues, that kind of stuff. We set the stage of it being a little looser than most group homes or partner agencies work. And they usually, I worked at a partner agency, so the first time a kiddo comes in and says, I don't want to do that, and the free arts mentors say, that's okay, relax, it's okay. The staff usually will go, and but they have to, and once they let the free arts model of choice for voice and choice for the participant, everything goes very smoothly. And so they see, and we win that partner agency staff into oh, this works, okay. The enthusiasm grows for the program for sure.
Yeah. I also want to add that when we come to the expectations for the partner agency, I think because you kind of reminded me of it when you're talking about, well, what if the child doesn't want to participate? Or what if there's some type of disruption or something during it? And the natural tendency is to remove that child from the space or to withhold their ability to participate at a future opportunity. Like, oh, well, your behavior wasn't good for whatever reason. And one of the things that we really stress here at Free Arts is that we really do not want any of our partner agencies to ever use our programming as a form of discipline, or lack of participation as a form of discipline, because everyone can benefit, and it defeats the purpose of what it is that we're doing and what we're trying to do in terms of self-regulation and coping and the neuroplasticity that we spoke about in another episode. And so that's one of the expectations we have, is that we have to work together and recognize, yes, there are some things that can happen, some behaviors maybe that we don't want to reinforce, but removing them from a space that is intended for their well-being, their healing, and their ability to build resilience is not the way to counter some of those behaviors.
Yep, both good points. There is a little bit of a relationship you have to manage as a volunteer with the participants and the partner agency, but I think that defines it. And then, as always, there's resources with our staff. So if you weren't sure, you do the best you can in the moment, and then talk to the coordinator about what to do next and how to handle it in the future. And we can work on all of that. So those are very good answers. I want to shift gears to the next one for you, Jenna. And I like this question because it was asked of me twice. The 2 times I've trained, I've had this question come up. And so the context is, in our training, we make people aware of ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and there's a quiz that gives you a score. So our question for you, Jenna, is how volunteers have asked, how does this score affect me? Does this mean there's something wrong with me if my score is this number?
Yeah. That is a really good question, because I think there's a really big misconception about what that score means and what the purpose of the questionnaire is. A lot of people make the assumption that the questionnaire is like predictive, right? Like, or very indicative of, this is my reality, this is unavoidable. And that's not the intention. The intention of the questionnaire is that it gives insight into the likelihood of outcomes, of negative health outcomes. But it doesn't mean that it's that, okay, if I had these experiences, it's automatic that I'm going to develop all of these different ailments. What buffers could potentially be in place that can alter those effects? What positive factors are there to counter the risk factors that exist? So what it shows us is that, yes, if you have a higher ACE score, you do have an increased likelihood of possibly developing negative health outcomes in the future, but it doesn't mean that it's causing those health outcomes in the future. And when you look at how that could potentially happen, you're talking about your disrupted neurodevelopment as a child, and specifically with the adverse childhood experiences, you're talking about disrupted neurodevelopment. You're talking about the brain's inability to function and grow the way that it was intended to, due to ongoing toxic stress. I'm going to do my best not to give you a mini orientation. But what happens is when you have that disrupted neurodevelopment, the brain is not functioning the way that you're anticipating or that it's expected to. What happens? Your body is going through toxic stress, which is increasing inflammation in the body. It is negatively impacting your immune system, and it makes you more susceptible to disease and illnesses, coupled with risky behaviors in the future due to poor coping mechanisms put in place. So it's a combination of different factors, but the key thing here is that it doesn't cause these outcomes, but it definitely can show an increased likelihood of these outcomes developing, negative health outcomes developing in the future. So there's hope. When you take your ACE score and you see if you see it's really high, it's not the end of the world.
Yeah.
It's not.
It's like you're reading the face right now of the people that are like taking it and like, oh.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. And so I think it's helpful to remember that lens. Like, this is a macro-related look. Like, these types of things tend to these experiences lead to other things. Mm-hmm. But a clinician that was meeting you for another purpose is not using ACEs to diagnose you.
No.
So your experience of symptoms, right? And neither does a high ACE score mean you have PTSD. That is, it has its own chart in a different book with its own scoreable tests, and it is not what we do. We do not diagnose people either in our training or in our programs, but we are using this to promote awareness, we hope, as you interact in a mentorship way. But I also think there's a public health good in us doing this training with just average people, because then we start to think through, wow, how do all of our relationships, how do all of the connections, the environments that we build the ones that we don't provide the right upkeep, how do they all contribute to these experiences that are very stressful for children and teens?
Well, we also put in our manual the resiliency questionnaire. So it talks about the effect of caring adults. And so when you take the ACEs score and the ACEs questionnaire, and then you take the resilience questionnaire, you can see that there's things that mitigate those outcomes. So I think it's a really valuable thing to have both of them together, so it shows that it's not inevitable.
So one of the things I like to remind people is, like, regardless of us being not perfect humans all the time, people that come and work at Free Arts or volunteer at Free Arts all have a good intent. They want to help. That doesn't mean that people don't get upset sometimes. So for you, TJ, in a program, in a moment, what would you say to a volunteer who's concerned about, what do I do if I trigger someone's feelings or a child gets upset because of something I didn't even mean to have any kind of negative impact? How would someone in a volunteer situation handle that?
The first thing that I usually suggest is remembering to pause and breathe, because we want to take a step back rather than a step forward and just think for a second. And then I believe that apology goes a very long way. And I also believe that then you apologize if it was something that you think you did, and then you let it sit. Letting things just sit and knowing when not to talk is actually really, really important, I think. And allowing the staff that's in the room that knows the participant better than you do, or the parent, guardian in the room, in our family program, they know. So they know sometimes the better way when to talk and when not to talk. And generally speaking, not talking is better. And so we do talk about, if there are really big behaviors, that's not your responsibility. That's why we have staff, the facility staff in the room, or parents in the room. And so, and it really doesn't happen, just, again, I'm from a partner agency originally. It doesn't happen a lot when you're on site, because they're happy to see you. You are a guest. And they are happy, like, you're the new person. Ooh, exciting visitors,
Yeah.
So it doesn't happen very often. And just being calm is a really important part of it. And caring that you upset them. I'm sorry I upset you.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think even as we're, you said something about learning when not to talk, right? So not to explain what's happening to someone is usually not very calming, but, helping them to connect to what does feel safe. What do you need right now to feel safe?
Right, yeah.
Right? And then, or offering some choices. Would you like to sit alone for a minute? Would you like a glass of water? Would you want to take a break for a minute? Use whatever skills you might have. And some are receiving treatment on their own, separate from what we do, where they might be able to do a thing or two that they've learned that can help regulate in the moment. And so, I think it's important, like you said, to point out this is rare. So don't let it be a fear that keeps you from engaging. Right. But we do have the skills to do it. And I know, like, in a clinical setting, like, I've accidentally said the wrong thing or taken something to be a joke that was not a joke, and then, caused someone to react in a way where they very much have a history of not being heard, and now I've thought that was a joke, and it's not a joke. And you walk it right back. Like, I didn't mean that. And you clarify, and you give space for their reaction, because it's part of the training, right? That curve up in that the nervous system being supercharged by this threat, and then it will decline. Sometimes
that tantrum.
a little bit longer than we like it for it to decline, but it will. Yeah.
Well, and that we talk a lot about toxic stress in training, and that to not take the participant's reaction personally, I think, is a huge part. It's like, it might have nothing, probably 90% of the time, has nothing to do with you. and just listening sometimes and validating, like, oh, that must have been frustrating. Oh, I understand why you're upset. Have a glass of water, take a moment, I'll check in on you in a minute. That is very powerful because then they feel like they are seen and heard and all of that. So, and they sometimes need aloneness to figure it out.
Yeah.
Yep. Good stuff. Well, good answers to a difficult question. Jenna, we're switching gears. This can be more broad related though, but in your mind, what are the best ways to interact with a participant?
Yes, I think we kind of touched on it recently just now with some of the things that TJ was saying. But I would just add that because being in the volunteer trainings, people get really nervous about, oh my gosh, like, how do I connect with this individual? And we say the same thing. The best way to interact is to be yourself. Be genuine. There might be 2 generations in between you and the person that you're mentoring, but when you show up authentically, that's what matters because they know. I don't care what anybody says. Children and teens especially have supersonic skills that they can sniff out if you're being fake.
Yeah.
If you don't use that slang on a regular basis, they know that. They can tell it just didn't roll off the tongue correctly. And when you don't show up genuinely, you're not going to be able to build a genuine connection. And then that's not going to be beneficial for either party. And you also want to make sure you're having appropriate boundaries because a lot of what happens is I just want to give. I want to just give them everything and this, that, and the third and have expectations as to what the relationship is going to be. But the best way to show you care about someone is to model healthy boundaries, discuss those healthy boundaries, and respect those boundaries as well. And so those are the 2 biggest things that we would say that will allow you to have successful, positive interactions with all of our participants.
I like it. One more, and it's for you, Jenna.
Bring it on.
All right. What things should we keep in mind when we're going to the different types of agencies?
Yes, because you can volunteer with our group homes, you can volunteer with our families, our young adults, our unaccompanied minor shelters, and there will be some universal things that you follow, which we've mentioned already with the respect and the boundaries and so on. Those will be universal, but each group kind of has their own thing as well. So when you're working with our group home settings, that's a more relaxed setting that you really have to think, okay, like watching like the different dynamics between the group homes. Because like TJ mentioned, sometimes there are going to be some things that are completely unrelated to you that might have happened within that group setting, within them, that you have to be mindful of and navigate those group dynamics in the process. When you're working with your families, however, that sometimes is difficult because when you're watching a family, you might be seeing some characteristics or some traits within your own family in that group, and that might be even triggering for you. Mm-hmm. Figuring out, I don't like how you spoke to this one, I don't like how you spoke to that one. But the thing is that you have to be able to respect what's happening in that family. You don't go home with them at the end of the day to be able to dictate and say what's right, what's wrong, or challenge anything that you've seen. So sometimes it's really hard because you have an opinion on their functioning or how they're interacting. And the thing is that you have to be respectful, but then you also have to make sure that you're not coming into the space to disrupt with the flow that they have or that they created or whatever it is that they're working on with their team. They're the team that helps them, works with them and supports them. So working with families is really, really interesting because it's easier to see yourself or your family in the different types of families that we serve. It's bound to happen. And then when you're working with young adults, it's very easy to forget that they're participants because you're an adult and they're an adult, and you view them differently than you view a participant in our programs that's 11 or 12 years old. So sometimes you might want to engage with them in different ways, like on social media, like, oh, is that okay? They're an adult. And it's like, but they're still a program participant. So you have to be mindful of the ways that you interact with them. And then also remember that any of our young adults who are in our programs, coming with their own experiences, it affects how they show up. It affects their behavior. It affects their thinking. It affects everything just the way it does with any of our participants. So sometimes it's a very unfair expectation that we put on our young adults to say, oh, well, you know better, or you have this knowledge, or you know how to operate, you know this, you know that. And sometimes that's not the case. And so we have to be mindful of that and recognize the setting that we're in and how that can potentially be, can challenge our view. And lastly, we have our unaccompanied minors. And I think the biggest question that comes there is, but I don't speak the language. That's okay. We provided the language for you. It's called art. And that's how you communicate. And then I tell people, I said, well, when you're teaching a child, a baby, an infant, and they're learning, they don't know what you're saying. You're not communicating with them, right? You're communicating with them, but not verbally. I said, but they're learning, and you're still able to be able to express yourself, and they express themselves. I said, the concept is the same. You don't have to speak the same language in order to get your point across. Not to mention, it does help that we have translation tools, interpretation tools. That is helpful. But the language is in the art. And they are going to express themselves in the art. And your responses, your body language is going to convey as well. So never be worried or afraid when you're working with the different populations. But there are some things to consider when you're working with them, is that you can't approach every single group the same.
Excellent. And I think that brings it back to a common thread among all of this. That there are a lot of resources. So as a volunteer, there are other volunteers you can talk to. Some of our programs, you're not alone in terms of being the only free arts person there. So there's immediate help. And then there's, how would you do this in the future? Opportunities with any member of our staff. So we feel like there's a lot of support to be yourself and to learn as you're serving alongside and able to help and make our programs effective. So thanks, Jenna, and thanks, TJ, for joining. And any final comments about ways that we can support our volunteers?
Ways that we can support them?
Yeah.
Oh, well, we're always around to answer your questions. I think that's one of the biggest things, is how we can support you. But just know that you're not alone, and we appreciate every single thing that you're doing for all of our families, all of our participants here. And we're just happy to have every single one of you alongside with us over the last 30 years and counting.
Thanks, Jenna. Thanks, TJ.
Yep.
This is Canvas of the Heart. Check us out on freeartsaz.org. And we hope if you've made it this far, you're in love with being a volunteer or you're ready to join. And so we'd be happy to get you started and trained.
Bring a friend.
That's right.
You
Tell
have
someone.
the buddy system.
And on that note, we'll talk to you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of Canvas of the Heart. We'd love to hear your questions and feedback by email at hello@freeartsaz.org. You can find more information about Free Arts by visiting our website at freeartsaz.org. We'd like to thank the many individual and corporate donors and the hundreds of volunteers that make Free Arts programs possible. Take care, and we will talk to you soon.